My name is Laxmi Kumar, as the moderator just very kindly introduced, and I lead a UN flagship project at the UN Environment Programme Finance Initiative. I'll get to this in a bit, but let me start with emphasizing the importance for all of us being here today, and particularly the investors. As many of you will know, this year, this summer, has been the hottest on record ever. Our Secretary General even referred to it as entering the era of global boiling. Temperature skyrocketed into upper 60s in parts of the Middle East. Wildfires ravaged through Maui, devastating and turning Lahaina into a death trap with devastating impacts on humans, wildlife, the economy, and the environment as a whole. And the same can be seen in Greece and in Canada at the moment. Science is clear on this. If we don't act now, we will reach destruction to a point of no returning. And honestly, if this doesn't scare you, I don't know what else would. But thankfully, we're seeing change happening. We're seeing heightened attention on these issues. Issues like preserving our precious biodiversity, issues such as accelerating transition to a net zero economy. But more needs to be done, and we have to move faster. We're literally sitting on a ticking time bomb, and we can see this day in, day out in the news. Floodings, rising sea levels, droughts leading to, for example, crop shortages. And these are just a few examples, right? Over the past 2 years, there has, however, been a notable increase in legal frameworks, international legal frameworks designed to do exactly that, to really protect biodiversity, look at how to accelerate a just transition. So some of these frameworks include, for example, the UN High Seas Treaty, which is actually quite a milestone because it took about 10 years in negotiation processes to reach that agreement. And it's key for preserving and protecting our oceans and any international waters beyond jurisdictional confines. Then we also have the Plastics Treaty, which is presently under negotiation, and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which yet presents another historic milestone in environmental protection and development. And all of these international frameworks, legal frameworks, they not only foresee or provide pathways for states seeking to align their national policies with international ambition, they also foresee a very clear role for the private sector, and in particular, the private financial sector. Because ultimately, investments and capital drive innovation and development. And considering that state of urgency that we're in at the moment, we have to make sure that this development is sustainable. And investors play a key role in this. Through your investments or through investment practices, you can support businesses to take active roles on some of the most pressing sustainability challenges we're currently facing. But it's not just about doing good business or doing good. It's about doing good business because at the end of the day, our financial system relies on the viability of those natural systems. I'll move to the next slide here. And those natural systems, they're presently under threat. And that threat is caused by human activity, by decades and years of unsustainable production and consumption methods. So I've included a visual here. I'll get to that later. But as I mentioned, there is a clear business case for embedding sustainability practices throughout all of our investment activities. Because sustainability impact objectives not only help mitigate risks, some of those which could lead to the collapse of entire markets and the financial system as a whole, also referred to as so-called system-level risks. Pursuing sustainability impact objectives also helps to realize and forge new business opportunities. So as I mentioned, before we move on to the next slide, I'll very briefly touch up on this visual that I included here. So that really just explains, it's a biodiversity example, but that really explains that interlinkage, interconnectedness between those different components. So we have the economy as a whole, we have financial institutions, we have investee enterprises, so companies, and we have our natural systems. And we can see that companies feed back to financial institutions, which feed back to the overall economy. And at the same time, those companies have an impact on those natural systems, but they also are dependent on them. So there is a dependency on those systems. So I'll come to the next slide now, which is basically a legal framework for impact, which is the project that I lead at the UN Environment Programme Finance Initiative. And it's a joint project between the Principles for Responsible Investment and the Generation Foundation. So what's different about this project is basically that change in perception. So really moving away from this question, or basically moving away from this, we're integrating or we're pursuing ESG as part of risk and return considerations. So moving away from that to, okay, we're considering what impacts I, as an investor, my portfolio has on sustainability issues, because at the end of the day, as we've seen in the previous slide, there is a dependency, so it will come back to me at some point. So it's basically about proactively pursuing sustainability objectives and not just ESG integration. And for that, the three partners basically commissioned leading law firm Freshfields to answer a question, or to basically examine to what extent current legal frameworks across 11 jurisdictions would allow or even require investors to pursue such sustainability impact objectives. I'll get to the findings soon, or after that slide, basically. But yes, so that was phase one. It was extensive legal research, took 2 years. With the publication of that report, we officially concluded phase one of the project. And at the moment, we are in phase two, meaning the three partners are currently working on the implementation of policy reforms in 5 key jurisdictions, which includes the EU. We're taking this or counting this as one jurisdiction, basically. So I'll come to the next slide. That is basically just to, so that's not necessarily about the findings itself, but it's just to outline what I mean by investing for sustainability impact and how this differs from mere ESG integration. You can see that there is an overlap. However, as I mentioned, ESG integration is really pursuing ESG because it's relevant to risk and return considerations. However, investing for sustainability impact, the acronym is IFSI, is really about intentionally trying to bring about accessible changes in the behavior of investee enterprises. And in that legal analysis, we've basically distinguished 2 types of IFSI, investing for sustainability impact, namely instrumental. So an investor would be pursuing that because it is relevant to achieving the financial return goals. It's instrumental for that. So there is a bit of an overlap to ESG integration there. And then the ultimate ends one. So that's really, we're pursuing sustainability impact objectives not as a means to achieve our financial return goal, but as an end in itself. So I'm coming to the key findings that we have there. Of course, it will differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I mean, that work covers the 11 jurisdictions, right? But across most of the jurisdictions, what we could see is that financial return is generally regarded as the primary objective of an investor, but that wherever it could be relevant for an investor's financial return objectives, an investor may even have or will likely have a legal obligation to pursue sustainability impact objectives. And a failure to do so may actually lead to a breach of fiduciary duty. And in some circumstances, which are of course a bit more limited, investors will have the discretions, the legal freedoms to pursue sustainability objectives for other reasons than as a means to achieving financial return goals, so as in parallel to them. And last but not least, of course, if your financial product, as I understand, most of you are impact investors, right? So if your financial product commits you to pursue such objectives, let's say you have you've committed that your portfolio will be invested in women-led enterprises, then of course you will also have a legal duty to do exactly that. So that's it in terms of the key legal findings. As I mentioned, I understand that most of you are already impact investors, so you should be very familiar with how to do this, but I've basically broken this down in 4 steps. How can you invest for sustainability impacts? So basically, you would identify in the first step the system level risk that would be relevant to your portfolio. Let's say climate change, because that's the most obvious example. And then you would see, okay, what is the required outcome or desired outcome that you'd want? In the next step, according to your strategy, you would set concrete goals, set concrete objectives, and then act upon those. And to act upon those, you can use the levers that are available to you. And those levers include asset allocation. Those levers include engaging in policy, public policy engagement, or pursuing stewardship, and of course acting collectively, so acting in concert with other investors. And at the end, you would basically, in a periodical manner, assess and monitor the progress towards that objective that you've set and disclose to any relevant stakeholders and beneficiaries. So still, why do we need policy reforms? Well, that extensive legal analysis showed that investors who are already keen to invest for sustainability impact unfortunately still face a number of perceived and existing barriers. And some of those include, for example, that investors are still uncertain about what the law actually requires or allows them to do with regard to investing for sustainability impact and their legal duties as fiduciaries. So what we need is more clarity, more guidance from policymakers here. And then we unfortunately also still have rather backward-looking interpretations of the law. So if you look at, for example, the interpretation of beneficiaries' best interest, right? In many jurisdictions, that's still understood to be solely financial, but we all know, I mean, at the end of the day, beneficiaries need to be able to live on a livable planet. So sustainability considerations are actually key, but yet, as I mentioned, interpretations are still a bit backward-looking. And, of course, the whole topic around disclosures and product standards, which is a bulk in itself, so I won't really go into it. But we have fragmentation across jurisdictions, even on a jurisdictional level. Impact is not really embedded yet. It's starting to come, but still very much in its infancy. And basically, the areas for policy reform can be really classified into 2 main categories. So we can try to change and amend laws and regulation, and of course also try to improve market practice and the enabling environment. So I would like to end my keynote by really emphasizing that we owe it to future generations and to ourselves to leave behind a world that is worth living for. And you, as investors, hold immense power to steer capital into a sustainable direction.